Alright, third graders, here it is, your last video. And this time we're doing subtraction without regrouping. So in the video that we did earlier in part 1, we were adding. Now we're subtracting. So when we were adding, maybe we were adding 327 plus 138. And we learned that 7 plus 8 is 15, so I have to regroup that 10 from the 15. That's the regrouping, right? Where I'm moving it over. Your parents learned that that was called carrying. Carrying and regrouping are the same thing, okay? So then I add my tens, and if I have 1 10 plus 2 tens plus 3 tens, that's 6 tens. And then I add my hundreds, and if I have 3 hundreds plus 100, that's 4 hundreds. So when we took the 15 ones, because I had 7 ones, and I had 8 ones, okay, when we took 10 and put it together as a group of 10 and moved it over into the tens column, that was called regrouping, when I took 10 ones and put it together and made a 10 out of it. Now we also regroup in subtracting. Regrouping refers to grouping up or ungrouping tens and ones and hundreds into groups of 10, okay? So in second grade, you probably used the word ungrouping when you were subtracting. So today we're going to practice that. Okay. So here I have 367, but I have to take away 124. So if I had blocks and I built it in front of myself, it would look like this. I would have 3 hundreds, I would have 6 tens, and I would have 4 ones, right? Oops, not 4 ones. 7 ones. Okay. Now I have to take away 100, 2 tens, and 4 ones. So the first thing I would do is I would come over here in my ones place and I would take away 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I took 4 away, I would have 3 left. And that's what I have. I've got 1, 2, 3. Now I have to take away 2 tens. 1, 2. And I have left 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I took 20 away or 2 tens away, I should have 40 left. So far, so good. And I have 3 hundreds and I need to take away 1 of them. So take away 100, I would have 2 hundreds left. So my answer would be 243. Now, what I did was I did it with my blocks. Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do the standard algorithm. And that's where you go column by column, starting in the ones place. We always start in the ones place. Where? We always start in the ones place. Okay, 7 minus 4 is 3. 6 minus 2 is 4. 3 minus 1 is 2. Same answer, 243. One way to check our work when we subtract is to add. So I could take my 243 that I just got and add it to 124, and I should get this number if I'm correct. 3 plus 4 is 7, 4 plus 2 is 6, 2 plus 1 is 3. So they match. So 243 is my answer. I checked it, it's right. So I've done it with blocks, and I've done the standard algorithm. But this is not a problem where I had to regroup or ungroup. I just subtracted. It was super simple to subtract. It's not always like that. Sometimes I've got to take away more ones than I have. Here, I've only got 5 ones because in the number 435, there are only 5 ones. But I have to take away 8. So where am I going to get 8? Well, if we were in the classroom, I would hand you a 10 and we would take it apart. If I took apart a 10, it would be 10 ones. That's that ungrouping that you learned about in second grade. It's like you go to the bank and you trade in a $10 bill for 10 ones. $10. So I traded it in. So this is gone now. Now I only have 2 10s, but I have 15 ones now because I have the 10 that I got from the ungrouping plus the 5 I started with. So I took away a 10 and I moved it over to the ones place. That's the ungrouping. Your parents call that borrowing. You borrowed from the guy next door. Okay? Now we're going to subtract the 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I have 7 left. Okay? Now I move over into the ones place, or I'm sorry, into the tens place. I have 2 10s. I have to take away 2 10s. So 1, 2. Do you have any 10s left? No. So I put 0. And now I've got to take away 100. How many hundreds do I have now? I have 3. So my answer is 307. This work that we did right here, that's the ungrouping or borrowing. We borrowed a 10 from the tens place, moved it back over to the ones place so that we could subtract. Okay, so let's practice that. We're going to just practice that standard algorithm. Okay, so I have a little chant or a little rhyme that I follow, and it's more on the floor, question mark, go next door, borrow 10 more. Okay, more on the floor, go next door, borrow 10 more. So when I have more on the floor, this is your floor. You have more on the bottom. Your bottom number is greater. Your digit is greater. 5 is greater than 3. So that means I'm going next door, borrowing 10, moving it over. Because if I have 3 and I move over 10 more, that's going to be 13. 13 minus 5 is 8. Now, I ask myself the same question. Do I have more on top or more on the floor? Again, I have more on the floor. 7 is more than 5. So I go next door. I borrow a 10. I move it over here. So now this is 15. 15 minus 7 is 8. 1 minus 1 is 0. So my answer here is 88. So if there's more on the floor, you go next door, you borrow 10 more. Then you can subtract. If you have more on the top, there's no need to stop, you just subtract. Okay, let's look at another one. Do I have more on the floor or more on top? 9 and 8. I've got more on top. So if there's more on top, no need to stop. Just subtract. Okay, 9 is greater than 8. 9 minus 8 is 1. But now I have to ask myself that question again. Do I have more on the top or more on the floor? Got more on the floor. So I borrow 10 more. And 11 minus 2 is 9. 2 minus 1 is 1. So my answer is 191. Now I can check my answer, remember, by kind of doing it backwards. 191 plus 128. I better get 319. Let's see. 1 plus 8 is 9. 9 plus 2 is 11. And that's 3. 319. So it worked. So that's the right answer. Okay, so I'm going to start here. Do I have more on the floor or more on top? 3 and 2. Looks like the 3 is greater. That's on top. So don't stop, just subtract. 3 minus 2 is 1. Move over a column. Same question. More on the floor or more on top? I think it's more on the floor because 4 is greater than 0. So go next door. Borrow 10 more. 10 minus 4 is 6. 5 minus 1 is 4. So let's check our work. 461 plus 142. I better get 603. Let's see. 1 plus 2 is 3. 6 plus 4 is 10. And 6. Do they match? They do. So my answer is correct. Uh-oh. This is where it gets tricky. I've got more on the floor, so I have to go next door and borrow. But does this guy have anything? No, he's empty-handed. So we're going to come all the way over here and we're going to borrow. That turns into 8. This borrowed. It got 10 more. But now it has to share with this sad guy over here. So he's going to turn into 9, and he's going to turn into 10. Now I'm going to subtract. 10 minus 6 is 4. 9 minus 7 is 2. And 8 minus 4 is 4. When you have those zeros that you have to borrow from and they don't have anything, I like to think about it like this. It's like money, okay? Let's say Mrs. Shock and Mrs. Court and Mrs. Wishart were all hanging out at the park because social distancing was over and they were allowed to hang out again. They're hanging out at the park, and the ice cream truck comes. So in comes the ice cream truck, and Miss Shock gets so excited, and she wants an ice cream so bad. So she reaches into her pocket, but she doesn't have any money. So she says, Mrs. Wishart, I really, really want an ice cream. Can I borrow some money? And Mrs. Wishart says, I don't have any. But then Mrs. Wishart says, wait, we have one more friend here. Mrs. Court, can I borrow some money? And Mrs. Court says, sure, and she gives her a little bit of money. And then Mrs. Wishart gives some of that money to Mrs. Shock, and then they all have a little bit, right? So think about this problem like that. Mrs. Shock is right here. She wants some ice cream, but she doesn't have any. So she asks Mrs. Wishart, who's right here, do you have some money? Mrs. Wishart doesn't have any either, so they ask Mrs. Court. Mrs. Court says, sure, I can give you some of my money. And she gives it to Mrs. Wishart. And then Mrs. Wishart says, ooh, now I can give some to Mrs. Shock. So we just can't skip over Mrs. Wishart. She can't get ice cream then. And her and the babies want some ice cream too. So they've got to borrow. And they borrow from Miss Court, and then Mrs. Shock can borrow from Mrs. Wishart and the babies. And probably Juliet too. We should give her some ice cream. Okay. That's when it's hard, is when you've got a zero you have to borrow from and you don't have anything. But if you always think about the ice cream, it will help you. Here's another example like that. 1 minus 9. I can't do that. I've got more on the floor. So I go next door and I say, can I borrow some? But sadly, that guy doesn't have anything for me. So he asks his next door neighbor. And his next door neighbor says, sure, you can borrow some. So now he has 10. But then he says, now that I have 10, I can share. So he gives 10 over here. And now it's 11 because he already had one, right? 11 minus 9 is 2. 9 minus 6 is 3. 4 minus 2 is 2. Okay, another one like that. Can't subtract because there's nothing there. Can't borrow because there's nothing there. So we borrow from the 7. It goes down by 1. Shares over a 10. Then we can borrow from the 10. It goes down by 1 to 9. And this one turns into a 10. Now we subtract. 10 minus 8 is 2. 9 minus 2 is 7. 6 minus 4 is 2. Okay, I'm going to give you one to do and then come back and check. So your problem is going to be 306 minus 128. This is going to be one of those situations where he asks this guy, can I borrow some? But this guy doesn't have any. So they're going to borrow from the hundreds and then borrow from the tens. So pause, solve, and come back. Okay, here we go. Can't do 6 minus 8 because there's more on the floor. So we go next door, but he doesn't have any. So he asks his next door neighbor. That turns into a 2. This turns into a 10. But then it can turn into 9, and this turns into 16. 16 minus 8 is 8. 9 minus 2 is 7. 2 minus 1 is 1. Now I'm going to check it. 178 plus 128 should equal 306. 8 plus 8 is 16. 1, 8, 9, 10, and 3. Does it match? Sure does. So that means my answer is 178. Okay. I'm going to encourage you to use the addition to always check your subtraction, because we always make less mistakes adding than we do subtracting. So always, always, always you should check with the addition. Okay, off you go. You're going to do the second part of your slideshow. Your word is subtraction. And then after that, you just have your end of unit quiz. Off you go, my loves.